Welcome back to this episode of the Strong Kind Podcast. This episode, I talked with Kyle Dobbs. Kyle is the operator of Compound Performance. He is on Instagram as Compound Performance with an underscore at the end. We had a great discussion about how the fitness industry often just makes things really, really complicated. And yes, there is a need for diving in and learning and understanding some nuance in the fitness and health space. But for the most part, we just want to try to create simplicity and orient around people's goals as best possible. So we talked a lot about individualization, different ways to train. We got a little bit into his fitness journey, and his goals right now as a father and a 42-year-old man who just wants to stay healthy. It was a great conversation. Really enjoyed talking to Kyle. I hope you enjoy it. Check it out. Appreciate you being here. Kick it off. All right, Kyle. I will say we were just kind of bantering back and forth, but you posted, and this is what led me to be like, I've been meaning to reach out to you and start this, like, hey, do you want to do a podcast? But you posted last week on it was a meme oriented around influencers getting into the nitty gritty of like biomechanics. And the post, I think, was just alluding to the fact that like most people don't even freaking train hard, and we're getting lost down the sauce of these biomechanical arguments all the time. um and it just was like it was just good, right? And I don't really care about the arguments in the fitness space so much, because the drama, like I always say this to people: if you want to grow really fast on social media, post your butt, be really funny,
Yeah.
or start fights,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not really interested. I'm trying to be funny, but I'm not that funny. But tell me like where a lot of your like what you're trying to do in the fitness space, and like why most people shouldn't get so lost in the sauce with the biomechanical stuff all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and even go back, I think, you're 100% on the money, as far as like marketing yourself and growing social media and whatever. Like those are the three strategies, like, and being as controversial as possible is definitely one that I think sticks out a lot. And I think it really sticks and is almost predatory on the people who care so much about the minutia more
Yes.
so than anything else. Right. And I think that being a segue into like biomechanics, as we kind of think about it being like the perfect topic for so much of this stuff, right? And I think, and what I always tell people, and just not to start over, but biomechanics is important. Like we all care about human movement and the way we move and trying to move as efficiently and effectively as possible for as long as possible, yada yada yada, right? Like I think everybody in the space, cares about that, and acknowledges that there is an importance there. When you get into some of these models and systems, and we get so deep down the rabbit hole of over examining and kind of just over complicating, just basic stuff to the point to where you're really creating a huge barrier for most people, and creating a lot of anxiety and just fear, for a lot of people as well. Like that's where it's like for me, I just kind of I have to step away and laugh about it a little bit and just understand that, it's interesting. I think a lot of it is a marketing strategy, even more so than beliefs,
Yeah.
just the thing that I'm fortunate or unfortunate, however you want to describe it, enough to know a lot of the people in these camps in person, having been in the industry a very long time and gone to education seminars and been in groups and been on text threads and everything else with a lot of them, and have, pretty strong friendships with a lot of them as well, just as a real person, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I've trained with a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so it's like behind the scenes, it's like they're doing for the most part the same
Same
things that
shit.
everybody else is doing, right? And
Yeah.
then you look on their social media and it's all this stuff, and you're like, we didn't do that when we trained a couple weeks ago. Like you didn't do all the resets and the whatevers, before we hopped in, and we got on the air bike for 5 minutes and then like started doing our warm-up sets, if I remember correctly, and it's just
Yeah.
it's one of those things to me where it's such a show. I think it makes things more confusing for a lot of people than anything else. And as someone who is naturally curious, like I think a lot of us are, it's like I've been down a lot of these rabbit holes. I've spent a lot of time and money throughout my career, invested in a lot of these systems and models and so on and so forth. And you know the interesting thing that I've observed the most is the deeper people get into them, the less they actually train. And
Yeah.
that was a story, for myself included. And if that's somebody's preference, that's somebody's preference. Like, I'm not judgy on that. I like to train. I i think most of my friends like to train. I know a lot of people who don't like to train that much, who are in this industry, and they like to really just go down the theoretical aspect of things. And I think that's fine. That's all up to them. And if that's their thing, that's their thing. But for me, like, that wasn't really cutting it for myself or the people that I was working with.
Yeah.
And because the people that I'm working with have physical and physiological goals.
Yeah.
They don't have theoretical movement goals. They're not standing around the water cooler bragging to their friends about that extra 5 degrees of femoral IR that they gained
Yeah.
on their right side because they opened up you know access to a presentation of more ER or whatever because of their AICBC pattern, or and it's just like they don't care about any of that stuff. And but they do care about getting stronger and getting better at whatever their task demands are, whether that's endurance racing or playing a field sport or playing with their kids or whatever. And for me, it's always just trying to figure out what's the easiest way to get to that aspect, and what does their movement need to look like to meet their actual goals. And
Yeah.
my business partner Matt and I, we kind of stepped away from a lot of that stuff, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, just when we noticed, like, it's like a lot of our clients aren't getting better because of these applications, because of this stuff, and just kind of took a more direct and simplified approach to their actual training and started focusing a lot more on just things like load management and training frequency, and looking at vertical versus horizontal integrations, and looking at like what their actual microcycles, macrocycles, and long-term athletic development programs look like, instead of really concentrating more so on like the day-to-day movement to movement things. Because we kind of found out really early on, it's like you're not going to make that many changes with
Yeah.
drills, right? Like, people literally get up off the ground, you load them up, and they self-organize right back into what they're most
What they're
comfortable
doing.
with anyway, right? And it ends up just being a waste of anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes, depending on how into it you really are, a lot of ways. And it's like, cool, if we really want somebody to move differently, we can probably just look at load placement and load management as a means of doing those things. And we just started getting way better results with people. We started actually decreasing their training time and increasing their outputs for the most part. And just for both our own experiences and the people that we worked with, it just turned into just a much happier space where we're not over analyzing some of these things. We're not, I don't want to say freaking out, we're not getting anxious about some of these things. We're not whatever, being fearful of certain movements or positions or orientations or whatnot, and just kind of just finding the best vehicle for the stimulus, as we say, and riding it for as long as we could.
There's a lot of like, really, I just resonate with so much of that. And like, it's like you get into the fitness space. A lot of people either like, I got in the fitness space because I freaking love to like, I kind of love to work hard, right? And then I kind of realized like, oh, I'm good at working hard. I'm not really good at like, I sucked in the weight room. Like, my first exposures, like I was very good at like, I could go run far, and but I like what you got me, and you put a barbell on my back, and I just like wasn't comfortable, didn't know how to move. And like, looking back on that, it's like, man, all some of my coaches at that level had to do when I was 16 or 17 year olds, just like, hey, squat to a box, put this in front of you, squat to that box, right? But it was just, there was an over, it wasn't that there was an overcomplication. There was my own anxieties about me being good at it, right? And that's the thing you always need to look at with like beginners, is like, are you just worried that you suck at this? Like, and the amount of people who they come in and they want to learn to deadlift, and they're also with their girlfriend, and they won't accept that they should just deadlift 135 for 3 sets of 5 and call it a day with decent form. It's like, no, let's do it. I gotta max out, right? But what happens though is you enter like I know a little, but I think I know a lot. And that becomes like the dissector or the I'm the fixer, right? And so much of this stuff is just oriented around and really where it hit me really hard was like going through physical therapy school. And I loved my education, right? But physical therapy is often you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars and then you either realize like, oh, most of this is just getting people to do shit that's kind of hard, right? I don't remember if it was you or somebody. I think it was you, and this clicked for me. It's like, you know, energy system development is probably a really good tool for like helping people manage pain because it just makes them a better organism. And it often, like, to get better at energy system development, like, you can just get on an air bike. And if
Yeah.
you're having pain with on an air bike, like, we got bigger problems. Most people I've never found have a whole lot of pain other than it just sucks to ride an air bike, right? Um, and then that gives people a glimmer of hope, right? And that's what I think is really important. And a lot of this shit, and I went down these rabbit holes too, where it's like, oh, I'm not a good squatter because, yeah, because I don't have enough internal rotation, or I don't have enough dorsiflexion, or I'm not built to squat. And I went on all these rabbit holes, and then I luckily came on the other side. It's like, no, you just suck at squatting. You just need to practice, right? And you need to have somebody that to hold you accountable to, like, yeah, you're going to show up and squat twice a week for the next 6 weeks and we're going to see how it goes, right? As opposed to, let's do all these drills, let's fix it, right? um when it comes to, like, yeah, you there's kind of problem orientation and goal orientation, right? And you seem very oriented around goals and then handling problems as they arise. Would you agree with that? And, like, tell me kind of the frameworks that have developed for you.
Yeah, I mean, so I think even getting a little bit, in front of that, I think a lot of it depends on, the type of population we're working with. Because I will work both ways, and I think, even the way that we've kind of systemized our intake and acquisition process is, one of the first things that we want to understand better for the people that we're working with is, are they a performance-based client, or are they, more of a general population client? And the way that we differentiate those two things is, it as simply as possible is, if you're a performance-based client, you are organizing your lifestyle around your training and your
Yeah.
sport, right? You are sacrificing parts of your life, right? Whether that's, just basic, you know, um, recovery, whether that's eating certain things, whether that's sleep, whether that's a social or family dynamic or aspect, whatever, right? You're organizing all of those things to fit around the actual training in the sport itself. Whereas if you're a general population client, you are most likely organizing your training around your lifestyle, right? Those things are taking precedent, in your life, and your training is just something that you do alongside that. And that doesn't mean that you don't train hard. That doesn't mean that you don't train with high frequency. That just means that that's not going to be the North Star of your life, right? I would like to think that I train fairly hard and fairly frequently. And I am a Gen Pop client through and through, right? Based on our own stipulations and our own categorization, standards. Matt is a performance athlete. He actually competes. He builds when he's in prep, when he's going through a prep cycle for his competitions, everything revolves around the actual sport and fueling the sport, recovering from the sport, everything does. For me, just I'm a 42-year-old dad of two that runs two businesses and tries to spend time with my family. It's like I'm not competing in anything. I'm mediocre in just about everything I do at this point in my life. I've been a two-sport college athlete. I've done other things at a very high level through my 30s and even into my 40s. And I realize that's just not where I'm at headspace wise right now. Right. Doesn't mean I won't ever be back there. But right now I'm as Gen Pop as can be. And I'm cool with that. And it's like, so when we look at that, those two types of avatars or demographics, they really demand two separate processes when you're training, as far as being output driven versus process driven, right? So when I'm working with a performance based athlete, the output and the end goal is always the end goal, right? And we're going to move on those daily obstacles and those weekly obstacles. We're going to, approach those, and we're going to problem solve and do those things. but we're not going to compromise nearly as much as we would with a general population person, right? If I've got, an athlete who's in marathon prep and we're a month out or even, 2 months out, and we've got some Achilles tendonitis or something of that or whatever. Like these are things that we're going to work in their training. We're going to adjust their training volume, their running volume as we need to. But the goal is to kind of get them through that to where they're back on the horse, right? Like the
Yeah.
goal is still the goal. The race is still the race. What they want to do is still what they want to do. If I've got a general population client that just wants to get better at running, for instance, and these same symptoms pop up, we're having a different conversation, right? It's like, okay, like we can kind of set things back until you're feeling better. Maybe we need a little bit more preparation and get you, just better prepared for the task demands at hand, kind of slow at that, graded exposure of running and time on your feet and whatever. We slow down that timeline and kind of see how we can progress it based on your lifestyle, because you only have 2 days a week to run. You're not running 50 to 70 miles a week, right?
Mhm.
It's like we have to kind of figure out what's going on here. So I think both of those things work. I don't think there's an, an absolutist right or wrong answer. I think it's just being able to apply the actual methodology with the right avatar. And I think that's, and again, it's like it's always an it depends, right? I think that's something that the industry acknowledges but also laughs at, because it depends without a solution is kind of a throwaway answer. But it depends with the solution provides a lot of context and some nuance or whatever, and you can kind of help people at the individual level.
Yeah. No, I think like the it depends, we have entered, like, when I first even started training, like what I would consider training, in 2007, even then there was not like there was information on the internet, right? But it was like T Nation, right? And
Oh
and
yeah.
then we've had the birth of more and more like science oriented, evidence based content when the pendulum always swings, right? And this kind of goes back to, it's pertinent to the beginning conversation. And the cool thing about like either one of those clients is like, hey, if you're Gen Pop, like we can keep you training in accordance with your general goals, right? If you're somebody who has a specific like tasks that you're trying to complete, then it really comes down to like, all right, what's your tolerance for some discomfort here? And also, and that might literally mean training less, because that's really uncomfortable for a lot of people, right? It's like we might have to do less work or less specific work to get you where you want to go, right? But like, it sounds like you've been in the fitness and the health, and I mean, you have an MS in psychology, right?
Yeah, I've got a master's in
Master's
psychology.
in psychology. So you've been interacting with humans, well, for 42 years, but like, in kind of the information age, let's say for like, let's just preface this for like young coaches per
Yeah.
se, right? Um, how do you like help them? I don't necessarily know if like having a filter is the right word, but like not get overwhelmed. This is a big thing in any of these professions. Like I think a lot of young PTs like, I gotta read 10 articles a week or I'm not staying up to date.
Yeah.
And like, how do you help people maybe frame that if you're talking to or mentoring like a younger coach, or even just with yourself, like
Oh yeah.
staying up to date, yeah, it can
Like,
be tricky, right?
oh yeah, I think sometimes your own personal filter is trickier than working with other people on theirs, right?
Yeah.
Just because of your own natural bias and interest and inquiry. One of my favorite quotes is Yuval Harari, and this is very offhand, but a lot of it talks about this is the first time in human history that the quest wasn't to obtain information, because information is readily available for the first time to anybody,
Yeah.
really in our history. Like everybody listening to this, everybody out there has access to all the information they actually need to be successful in almost any endeavor. And what really goes a long way now is that filter, the ability to filter through the utility of the information that's in front of you and then to apply it in a reasonable and appropriate manner.
Quick tangent on Yuval Harari, because I think that dude's super interesting. And I've only listened to Sapiens. I haven't really gotten into some of his other work, but like he thought what he was writing about was really uninteresting. He's like, this is like just like kind of fucking boring. But people started to sift through it and like, dude, you're actually like telling a really good like story here.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I love your point, and because isn't it like information is data, knowledge is connection, wisdom is knowing what to leave out,
Yeah.
right? So I'm with you. Like, keep going. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just
No,
think
no,
that dude's interesting. So
very, very. And you know, it's one of those things where it's, I don't agree with every single thing he says, but he's got some points that have absolutely stuck with me, you know, over the years of just reading his stuff and listening to him. And that was something that really stuck out to me just in my own personal journey where I was at the time where I was, you know, reading that book. And this is from Sapiens. Um, and it just really resonated with me just because there's so much out there. And like I said, I'm naturally, I want to know it all. Like I'll go down rabbit holes. I'll invest a lot of time. Um, and a lot of that time can be kind of fruitless, right? And once you get to the end of the line, you're kind of like, oh, well, this didn't really bring solutions. Like I know a lot more stuff now, but I don't really have ready solutions to the problems I actually had. So, you know, one of the things that we work with our clients, with the people that we, you know, kind of work with from an education perspective, is is really developing your own model and better understanding like what you really want out. Because I think the thing this is has really surprised me the most working with a lot of coaches over the years. And I mean, I worked in management at all different levels, you know, in my prior career. I was, you know, a trainer into a single facility manager into a district manager in New York, overseeing almost 1,500 employees, into a regional manager where I saw all East Coast operations for a company, into a national training director where I saw 17 markets and about 5,000 employees over the states. And I ran education and built out kind of the models and systems for all of those companies as I went. So I've seen it at a lot of different levels. I've worked with coaches at a lot of different levels. And then as we, you know, as I opened this business and built it, I've worked with a lot of coaches one-on-one and in groups. And one of the things I see the most is, you know, they go through systems put in front of them without really understanding what they're trying to get out of the actual assessments and testing and training protocols that they're utilizing. And, you know, clearing that up for people is sometimes all it takes is just saying like, hey, I noticed that you're doing, you know, XYZ movement screen and you're doing, you know, a little bit of performance testing. Like, what are you hoping to get out of this? And how is that going to actually be, how's that going to influence your programming moving forward? And they just look at you like, uh, I just want to know if they're like a 13 with two asymmetries, you know, or whatever, or if they're a wide ASA. And you're just like, okay, that's cool. Like, that's great. Why is that useful? Like, what are you actually going to do with that information to move this person forward? And you know, that's one of the things that a lot of coaches over the years couldn't really answer for me. You know, and even going a little bit further back, I've got a funny FMS story for later. We can even do it off the thing. But
no, I want you to tell it on here because I don't like. I'm not a giant. I'm not a super Bill Hartman esque. Like, I don't really get down the rabbit hole, and then maybe I should. But I haven't really got down like the Bill Hartman like I think even like I did a podcast with Greg Chaplin, who I really like Greg,
oh,
and
Greg's I love Greg.
but I'm like, dude, you're like the Bill Hartman like avatar, right? And I kind of give him shit, but like the FMS is one of those things that I just universally like I will shit on that thing for the rest of my days because it makes people feel broken
Oh,
for
it's
sucking at tasks that they're going to suck at,
yeah,
right?
well, and that was that's the whole my whole story. It's so yeah, just short snippet. I was running new trainer onboarding out of New York, so I would see 50 to 100 coaches every month. And to date myself completely, I was teaching them the FMS and the OPT model.
Yeah.
And so they were all the new coaches in the New York area for the gym chain that I was working for. And I realized pretty early on, I was like, I'm not making anybody better. I'm not actually helping people with this at all. They're going to have to do these tests, but I want them to actually understand the limitations of these assessments so they don't just jump straight to, you know, the 300 exercise library that leads to nowhere
Yeah.
from a progression standpoint. You know, so
I
I was like,
remember looking at that like algorithmic chart and be like,
yeah.
what the fuck are we
It's
doing
like
here? Anyways.
all of these just detrain people. That's crazy.
Yes.
They just lay
Yeah.
on the ground. So every time I did it, I would pick 5 coaches at random. And these are people in fitness. These are people who
Yeah.
probably played sports. These are people who at least train very frequently. And on Monday, I'd have these people for an entire week. I'd have them all do the FMS. And the rest of the group would score them. And early on, it's like the rest of the group was like, oh yeah, we're learning by doing this stuff. It's fucking great. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And they would be super into it. They get their scores. We basically average them up, tally them up. And then we're like, all right, we'll talk about this again tomorrow. And on Tuesday, we come in and they think we're having a big discussion. I'm like, cool. Okay. So we're going to run them through it again. And we did this every day. And by Friday, everybody got better at the FMS. Everybody's scores increased by an average. It was like by an average of like 4 points, which is pretty significant for people who are already probably above the 13 to 14 marker.
Yeah.
And I was like, so what did we learn here? And people were just like, and I was like, all of these people improved without doing a single corrective.
Yep.
Over the course of 5 days.
Yep.
Basically, they just got better at the test, right? We decreased novelty, increased familiarity. They better understood what the test was designed to answer, like what questions, what problems, whatever. And they learned how to game the test. And I was like, so do we think that bringing somebody in off the street for probably their first time in the gym in years, in some cases, if not ever, that's our typical personal training client, and we have them go through these very complex, completely arbitrary movements, do we think they're going to be good at them the first time they do them? No. Do we think their actual movement capabilities are the primary limitation here, or is it the novelty of the movement? Novelty of the movement. Like, okay, cool. So I just want everybody to understand this.
Yeah.
Right. That not doing well on this test is not a death sentence.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it doesn't mean we can't exercise. It doesn't mean we can't teach people to exercise. It doesn't mean that we can't give people better constraints to actually exercise the next day.
Yeah.
You can pick better solutions, right? You know, so it was just, yeah, but that's my FMS story. I tell it all the time to people just because it's like, so much of it is just it's skill acquisition, right? Like,
yeah.
And this is where for a lot of these systems, even going into like PRI or the Hartman stuff, right, is we, and I think this is even probably more useless in a lot of ways because, you know, the other thing we talk about with our people is the assessment process is you have passive and active assessments.
Yep.
Passive assessments, right, again, table tests, whatever, they show movement potential in a lot of ways.
Yep.
Is standing orientation. And active assessments show movement ability, right? What can you actually do with that with that potential in a lot of ways? And when I look at, you know, the table test, and again, like I've gone through all this, I've done it on people, I made the mistakes, you know, so they speak, you know, or in my own mind, and it's just like, you know, we give people a label, you know, you take an ISA or you have somebody go through an OBERS or whatever, and you take their measurements and you have them go through and you label them whatever, you know, and at that point, that person feels like they're not able to do certain things almost immediately.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just, it's like you're labeling their limitations. So you're pointing them out right away. You're not talking about, you know, how these things can be advantageous, what they can actually do with them, how you can, you know, work around them very easily with some very easy external constraints or even sometimes internal cueing, you know, with a lot of them. And it just, it creates, like you said, it creates a lot of fear and kind of useless noise around the exercise process for a lot of people where, you know, if you're looking at it from, you know, it's Matt and I's big joke is like everybody always just ends up with a heel elevated goblet squat anyway. So
Yeah.
right, whether you do it the next day or you do it 6 months from now when your person feels like that you can finally move off the ground, everybody's doing a heel elevated goblet squat. It's like we do all this stuff and everybody ends up with the same 3 exercises anyway.
Yeah. It's wild.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's the craziest thing for me is it's just like now we kind of look at this process and it's just like, hey, you know, if I'm working with somebody who's brand new to exercise, I kind of just assume they're not great at moving at this point. And if they surprise me, they surprise me. That's great.
Mhm.
But it's like, now it's like when I work with a client, I basically have them, I send them, 5 videos I want. It's like, I want a body weight squat, a standing toe touch, an Apley scratch test, a push up, and I want to see you walking away from me and towards me 10 steps.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, what are you going to use that for? I'm like, pick better exercise variations for you. And they're
Yeah.
like, it's not correct if it's not whatever. And I've got some people, that's the difference between, a different, freestanding barbell squat variation based on their goals. For some people, it's just like, hey, like, we're going to mash on machines for a while and just build like a good tolerance,
Yeah.
and we're going to build a good amount of just foundational strength and capacity. And we do this for 4 to 6 weeks, and we'll be able to do just about anything that we're able to do. And, it's like, we did a case study last week with our new group, and I've got one of my clients who's in the industry. His wife just, started training with me as well. And she's hasn't trained since before COVID and is very deconditioned by her own words, and hasn't been training, whatever. Her movement looked about how you would expect her movement to be. She wants to lose 30 pounds. She's deconditioned, whatever. And, we started basically, I picked 6 exercises and set them up in 3 different applications over the course of a 3-day strength circuit. The first one was just upper body supersets for a little bit of, peripheral heart, get her going. The second one, we did incomplete rest for a little more glycolytic work on capacity, buffering acid, all that jazz. And the third one was density sets, just to max out capacity. And we increased that literally on a 4-week thing. And it's like, I was going over the numbers with the group, and it's like, we took leg press just as an example. And week 1, she accumulated, it was something like 800 total pounds. Week 1, session 1. And by week 4, session 3, she had accumulated like 3,700 pounds on that one exercise. And it's like, okay, now we take that over all 6 exercises. And it's like, we went from, I think she had like, that was her heaviest lift too. It was like 1,500 to 1,600 total pounds of weight on her first training day. And we ended up with like almost like 2,200 pounds of like total weight on her last training day. And it's just like, a prior me from 10 years ago, we might not have got off the ground doing real work in this same amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And her feedback to me is, I'm stronger than I've ever felt. I'm so excited about training. I see the progress every time I go in. I can't wait for the next 4 weeks or whatever. And it's just like, any trainer, on Instagram, if I was to post this, this protocol on Instagram, 75% of the people that followed me would look at it and call it trash.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, right?
It it blows my mind, that just the gymnastics that people go through.
Well, let's get into that, because I think a lot of my evolution has been, so I mean, I did like high school sports. We'd hit the weight room with that. You look back at it and it was just, people just didn't really know. It was more just the dosage and the application of like what you're doing than a lot of things, right? Then I got into CrossFit because I liked it. It was new in 2007, right? And it was also very much just different than what I perceived, like the gym.
I'm not a CrossFit hater, dude. I think it's super fun.
I think CrossFit's amazing, right? And how it's kind of, for me, it's so interesting because the CrossFit when I started doing it now is like, I just look at that like, that is super good GPP that's not going to beat the shit out of people, right? Yeah. Unfortunately, how it has evolved has become this everyday butt kicker type of activity, right? And a lot of people, I will see people who are like, I was doing CrossFit or something similar to it 5 to 6 days a week. Why am I hurting? It's because like I'm gonna be real simple. Like, this is people don't get it, but it's like, because you literally redlined like every workout for 6 weeks, right? And then you feel bad when you take a rest day, right? And but then I like went through the Mark Ribito arc, and you said something earlier too, like there's a lot of things I just don't kind of enjoy Mark's vibe. I don't know him personally. I just don't like his like rhetoric anymore. But like, that book and his general philosophies on a lot of things are really good, right? But it also just overlooks the fact that like there's a lot of freaking ways to implement these same principles that is more enjoyable than just 3 exercises for 3 sets of 5, in my opinion, right? But like there's become this whole narrative that there's like this perfect thing, like there's this perfect structure to training that when we unlock it, when like my training system is better than yours and it gets better results. And it's like, the people who are my biggest hang up with like the starting strength book when I read it is like I saw that 16-week layout of the dude who went from like 135 to 405, and then when I could not replicate that, I felt like shit. Because I'm like, oh man, I was gonna squat 405 and I'm at 275, which actually like 275 at an end of a linear progression is like not that bad of a freaking thing, right?
No.
But there was this ideal in my head, right? And like talk more about that, because I also see like in your content, I'm like just scrolling your page a little bit too. It's like we just put out these ideas that like it's like what you did with like, all right, let's like dissect this a little bit more, and then people don't have an answer, right? Like what is the perfect training split, right? um and this is kind of what's led me to more just like, okay, like what are the physical qualities that we're actually trying to help humans develop, right? Strength, power, speed, some form of mobility. I hate mobility training. I'm talking about your ability to move, right? That looks different for different things. Cardiovascular endurance, hypertrophy, probably like skill, like coordination, being able to do the shit you want to do. Like those are basically the things that we can actually train, right? And if you take that almost broad approach, as long as we're not beating the shit out of you and you're enjoying it, then we're probably moving in the right direction, right? And we can make tweaks along the way.
I mean, it's funny because one of the, one of the first things we teach is week one is really about like intake and assessment. And that it always surprises a lot of the people that we work with, or most, I shouldn't say a lot of them, some people follow along enough to kind of read between the lines, but it surprises most of the people. Like, so what's the most important thing about your training model, right? Like, and a lot of them are we're naming off sets, reps, exercise selections, postural compensation, strategies, whatever. And we always surprise them. We're like, hey, like your model is centered around your training demographic. Like that's the number one most important thing. Like who do you actually work with, right? First off, the most basic split, is it performance based athletes or is it general population, clients? If it's a little bit of both, you actually probably need two models.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the number one determinant, right? Because that's going to influence everything else that you do from a training perspective. And then when we start getting into the perfect training program, it's like, okay, now what's the second most important thing that we're talking about? And people kind of throw out all these other things, periodization schemes, whatever, and it's like their training availability and the frequency at which they can train, right? Can they train twice a week? Can they train 6 times a week? That's going to influence what all of your dosing looks like across the board. That's going to influence vertical versus horizontal integration, a concurrent scheme versus a linear scheme, whatever, right? All of these things are going to be determined by training frequency. That's how you're going to lay out all the various, quote unquote vehicles for stimulation, whatever. And then we can actually start talking about like the perfect training model for that person, right? Because you can't write a model for, and it'd be like, well, the perfect training model is 6 days a week. It's a 3-3 split of strength and conditioning. It's got 2 high stem days, an oxidative day, and 3 like moderate stem glyco strength days. Well, yeah, that works for somebody with 6 days a week that they can actually train. But what happens when that person comes back and says, I can actually train 3 days a week? Shit.
Yeah.
My perfect model just fell apart.
Yeah.
It's like, damn. So it's like we have to know these things before we can build it out. So it's like the perfect model, and George Box style, it doesn't exist. Like
Yeah.
all models are flawed, but some are useful type thing. But this is where we start talking to people. It's like, hey, like we have to build our model individually around the person you're working with. If you're working with a broad demographic and you want to make it more goal specific and have people meet around that, that's fine. It's just not an individualized training approach anymore, which is fine. you're either going to build a model around the person in front of you or the demands of the task of the demographic that you're trying to reach, right? That's starting strength. Like, oh, you want to get big and strong, you want to maybe get into barbell sports. Here's a plan.
Yep.
If you can't do it, fuck you. If you
Yeah.
can, awesome. Maybe you'll get the results, right? That's actually a
It
Mark
works. It
Rippetoe
works
quote.
100% of the time
That's a Mark Rippetoe quote. You just
yeah.
didn't drink enough milk.
Yeah.
No, I met him way back in the day, and he's an interesting.
He's kind of like an evolution of like the like that type of an influencer where
Oh
you
yeah,
just keep playing towards your demographic in
I
such a
think.
way that,
Oh yeah,
and
100%.
I've also just kind of heard like he's just kind of an a-hole. Like
Yeah.
he's just not like it's not that he's per se mean, but he's just not like a kind human that's gonna like walk you through the process type of thing.
Oh
And
yeah. I
right.
mean, and it's like I grew up in the Midwest on a farm, hanging out with my dad and uncles and their friends, and it's like for me, it's like this dude could be my uncle.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
just like he's just a
Yeah.
hard nosed like
Yeah.
gruffy dude, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
His way or the highway type of thing. But that's always our thing. Is it's like that's the, there is no perfect training plan, but I think you can have a model that has the steps to start building out appropriate programs for people.
Yep.
And I think those are the things that we have to think about first. The second thing that once we get into the actual, assessment process is, okay, based on your goal selection, what are the task demands that you're going to have to meet? Kind of what you were saying earlier. Is it power? Is it a level of endurance and capacity? Is it coordination, skill development? One of those things. Is it a combination of those? And from there, we can actually build out, assessments that measure your ability to perform those things, right? Because again, I think the assessment process is so much more than just what trainers kind of see it as now, is like it's a movement screen, right? It's like we have to go beyond that, right? We have to see what like that movement actually does. Like, can you produce force? Can you decelerate force? Can you move for a long time? Right? Can you move with coordination? I think these are the things that we have to better understand, and we have to be able to test so that we can benchmark, categorize, and then set up, progressive training, built around these things. So again, the assessment protocols then translate into the training applications that we want to now layer over whatever frequency that is for that person. And then for us, one of the things that we've implemented over the last 2 years is once we have those testing strategies established, like we create a testing block. So the first block of any of our clients is really a 4-week testing block where they're going to work really hard. We're going to figure out, for me, it's very different than Matt's because we have very different demographics. But for me, I do want to know kind of like what a 3RM, testing max or training max is for most of my people at the big movements, and I want to know what their capacity is, and I end up doing a lot of like density blocks with their accessory work just to better understand like what their initial capacity looks like and what their ability to improve on those things is over the course of 4 weeks. Bi-weekly, I test, we do a lot of substrate differentiation with our conditioning tools. So I look at high stem work, moderate stem work, which is going to be your glycolytic work, and then your lower level oxidative or threshold work, your aerobic training. I have various testing that I want to see for that they usually test bi-weekly, so we get at least 2 exposures so we can see initial and then improvement upon. And then we build those things out into progressive training based on where I think their highest ROI is. And we can start biasing training blocks into intensification or into accumulation or something that's a little bit more mixed that I would refer to as like a metabolic block for a lot of people. So we can get a specific or stay general, depending on where they are on those things or where they are in a season or where they are, as far as where they want to be goal wise.
I think one of the things, so like, because it's for me, a lot of it is there's overlap in like terminology that I think a lot of people get lost in the sauce in, right? And like you're laying out like how your process and like there's overlap in what you're saying and like how to structure other programming and like you just have to have terminology for it. And I don't think a lot of people do have terminology
Yeah.
for the things they're doing, right? Which is kind of an important thing because this has probably been one of my biggest like things as like when I'm coaching people And because I used to just structure, like, I just used to title workouts like day one, day two, day
Yeah.
three. When I label it like what they like, I'm trying to take what their brain is trying to get out of this and then what I am trying to do and like meld them to one. General adherence seems to go up.
Yeah.
And like kind of even like, if I call this just like, hey, one of the things like we're trying to work on with you is like power output, right? um and like so if I just label that like components of it or that day, like, lower body power, right? Like it sounds cheesy, but all you're trying to do is help that person understand what the heck you're trying to do better so that they can implement it better, right? And that's like where I think a lot of us get lost in the sauce with things. Because yeah, like what you're doing, it sounds like you're more of a like a periodized, you've had more of a periodized model type of like, I'm just gonna say upbringing, right? Where like coming from like CrossFit as like my first exposure, like I got a lot of I did like really lean into like um energy system development pathways, but they were called other things, right? Because it was kind of their own spin on that. And then
Yep.
and then like, do I know what I know? Like type of thing, right? But I think it's just it goes back to what you're saying a little bit ago about like who is the target, right? And
Oh
what
yeah.
are they after, right? And how do I make this make sense to them? Because if it's an athlete, like they just like they need to trust what they're doing, right? If it's gen pop, they almost need to be oriented a little bit more like this is leading to this, right? So I just like I'm just listening, and like as I don't know who is going to listen to this per se, but I think a lot of like young therapists and coaches are starting to take in this type of material. And like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the utility of also, I'm just going to pitch you like going through your programming and learning your lexicon and your language so that you can actually put it into practice. Because this is another thing, this is just like a rant here, but like paying to work with somebody that actually helps you implement is way better than sitting and trying to learn it for yourself for like 2 to 3 years, in my opinion. I don't know
Yeah.
if you would
And
agree with that. You probably agree.
no, 100%, and I will say with every phase for every client, it's like that's something that I do the exact same thing where it's like I write like a full-on paragraph of like this is what we're trying to do this phase, this is why we're
Yeah.
doing it. Days one, like whatever days you're training, whether it's 3 days or 6 days, like I'm layering out because again, like my model is very vertical integration, which does consolidate stressors. So I will have like a high stem day and a moderate stem day and a low stem day. I will have those things spread out through the week. So I will label them and tell people exactly what I want out of those days and why we have them there, because it does help. Like it absolutely helps people, better understand what they're doing, why those things are important, and why they should kind of stay, why they shouldn't maybe go off program and max out on this day or whatever, right? Why they shouldn't, or for my people, and rather than maxing out, they're probably going to be more prone to running 7 more miles, or
Yeah.
something of that nature,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Doubling their mileage. Um, and it helps people better understand that it is part of a coherent plan, right? And
Yeah.
it's not just looking at things on a daily basis. We're really looking at how each day also impacts the other days surrounding it and is impacted by those things. um and as far as just like you said, kind of education versus mentorship or whatever, I think that is I wish that fitness had more of an apprenticeship type program,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I wish that really was a thing. I understand logistically how hard that would be, and but that is something that I really think would benefit so many, coaches and practitioners, just along the way, because yeah, learning the information and not knowing how to apply it or where to apply it is that's something you see every day
Yeah.
as you're scrolling, or even as you're just going through a gym and watching training sessions happen, or whatever, and just you see things that are theoretically correct, but like logistically and just the way they're being presented in the environment they're being presented in, you're like, that's probably not the best thing, right? They're not always like appropriately applied. And you can kind of see that process with that person where they're like they are looking through this like algorithmic type,
Yeah.
where they're like, well, this comes after this because we did this. And I think that's something that, at that point, it's like you're taking the human component completely out of training,
Yeah.
and like one of the major limitations, like, and this is another, story, as I was making my journey into the 3-letter acronym world is, I was working in, box gyms in New York, and I was doing and performing what I thought was, my best solution at the time, or my best strategy at the time. And I'm having one of my clients, sure, they're having, issues moving or whatever, based on the assessments I was doing. And I'm like, okay, well, we're going to lay on the ground. I'm going to have you kind of, work through these like respiration exercises. And the lady literally just looked me in the eyes, and she looked around, saw there's 300 other people on the gym floor. And she's like, I'm not doing that. And and I was like, oh, okay. She's like, is there something I can do, like anything besides laying on the ground and breathing right now? And I was like, I didn't have a good answer for her at the
Yeah.
time, because that was my plan, and I'm like, what do you mean you don't want to do it? And that was like a real like light bulb moment for me too, where it's like, oh, I don't have solutions. Like, I just have like the next step. And as soon as somebody's like, oh, I don't want to do that, I'm kind of like, oh, okay, well, we'll have to figure something out on the fly. Like, I didn't have a plan. And I think I also at that point realized that I didn't really understand kind of the base utilization of those tools.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't realize the whys behind what I was trying to do. And it's like, oh, like I probably could have just sat that person on a chest press machine, had them raise their, elevate their feet a little bit and work on a little bit more like protraction on their presses and bringing the ribs down and exhaling during the press, and gotten the same thing out of it, if not more, because now I'm loading up an exercise.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just like, it could have been that simple. At the time I was stuck,
Yeah.
and I think that's where understanding that things can't, like, utility is built in the actual like realistic application of the tool.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I realized that like something can be correct theoretically and completely useless in a real environment,
Yeah.
and that was a big eye opener for me. So I think there is like being able to go through that with somebody who's been through similar experiences, or has a better understanding of the application process, or what the end goal needs to be for this thing, will give you more roads, right? And will give you more options just on
Yeah.
a training floor to help the people that you're working with.
It really, like, it's like getting a business degree versus operating a business, right?
Yeah.
Like you could get theoretical knowledge of business, right?
Yes.
But actually, like, putting the rubber to the road and like figuring out how to keep your business operating, like, yes, some of that theoretical knowledge is important,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, like, most of it is pretty simple stuff, repeated like over and over again, until you actually kind of have like the aha moment of like, like the first time you ever like, yeah, the first time you ever like do a power clean well, and you feel like
Yeah.
yourself actually kind of, you know driving the barbell up through space without just ripping it with your arms. You're like, oh, that was a moment that doesn't come any other way than you getting enough reps with connecting the thinking and the moving together, right? And one of the best things that's helped me from just a confidence standpoint is, like, I've worked with enough coaches on a one-on-one basis or through some form of mentorship that's like, they're just probably they're good communicators, and they have a philosophy or they have a model that they utilize, but it's like, what I can put together, like, when I just start to actually trust what I'm putting together and make it make sense to me and them, like, we're probably on the right path, right? And that doesn't discredit them. It just means that, like, that working with them gave me enough confidence to been like, okay, so this is the principles, right? And a lot of people, I do think this, I hesitate to say it, but it's like, a lot of people really would make a lot more progress in a short amount of time if they actually leaned into working with a coach for like 6 months to a year, right? It would help them just like see that like, there's nothing magic, right?
Yeah.
There's just like there's this process, like, you're never gonna arrive, right? It's like, hey, you made a lot of progress over this last month, right? Hey, you made a lot of progress over this last 3 months. Really cool. Like, let's keep it going. Let's reorient, let's redefine, right? Um, Kind of last question. I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to like wrap it up with, you're a father. I'm gonna be a father soon. My wife's 38 weeks pregnant. So
Oh, congrats.
yeah, thank you. But like, what is like we didn't really get into this, and I kind of meant to get there earlier, but we got kind of going down the rabbit hole. But like, what is this really about for you? Like, what is fitness and health and stuff really about for you as like a dad and somebody who's been doing this for a long time? Like, all this stuff we've talked about, like knowledge oriented is important, but like, why the hell do you do this? Like, makes you motivated to keep training and and trying to enjoy the process? Because it shouldn't be a chore, in my opinion. Like, yes, it is kind of a chore, but like, I love to train. I love to do this stuff. But like, what's it about for you?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how my training focus has shifted, over the last decade. Like my oldest is 13 now, my youngest is 11. And I've definitely gone from being someone who really enjoyed like the competition aspect of performance training. Like I said, I played two sports through college. I kind of when I immediately graduated, I just trained and trained and trained. And then I realized I needed something to pursue. I got into indoor rowing and competed in that for 5 or 6 years at a pretty high level. And then I got into, back to my track roots and back into running. And over the last like 2 or 3 years, I've realized that it's just like, I don't have enough time to dedicate to being really good at something. And if I'm not really good at it, I almost kind of lose interest in it altogether. Like it's like I either need to be like super competitive and like good or not do it at all. And my own mental flaw. I think, just from being an athlete my entire life. And the good of that is I've actually started to enjoy my training. It's from just a day-to-day process, like way more. I just kind of go in, I mash weights, I do my conditioning work. I don't really have a preset goal right now. I'm having knee surgery in, early December. So right now it's just like I'm kind of doing what I can do and I'm trying to go into it as fit as possible. So the rehab process is a little easier, but outside of that, it's just kind of like, yeah, like I kind of just want to be able to, enjoy what I'm doing. My training frequency is, still pretty high. I usually work out 5 to 6 days a week, and doing things, but it's not really as goal oriented as I've kind of shifted into the process oriented aspect where it's like, yeah, like I'm pretty happy where I'm at as a almost 42-year-old. I look kind of the way I want to look. I'm the same size I was when I was in college as a
You look
active
good, man.
athlete.
I'm gonna float your boat here. You look like a
Yeah.
jack dad. I eat too much ice cream. I'm working on it, but you look good and strong. So yeah, dude.
It's just like I want to be able to play with my kids. My kids both are super active. They one swims and it's like a 5 day a week thing. It's like dude, he swims for 90 minutes straight, doesn't get out of the pool. And I'm just like, dude, I could not do that. Not
Swimming
even
also
close.
sucks. I mean,
Yeah, I'm just like, he loves it. I'm like, man, I would be dying every single day. My other plays basketball and soccer and does, all the things and they want to get into training and I'm slowly kind of starting with some low, GPP things and kind of just setting a good foundation for them and stuff. But just even seeing them as excited about being athletic, playing sports, being fit, being healthy, my one of the best things I did in my life is probably like I'm like my wife is not a classical gym person, used to be athlete. She's a normal person, which keeps me really grounded in a
that's my
lot of
wife
ways.
too.
Yeah, and it,
My wife does not like she gets the utility of it, but like and she's
yeah,
a PT too and she'll lift and stuff, but like my identity to some extent is rooted in some of this shit and my wife's like I don't care. Like
yeah,
she wants to go hike and she wants to live and that's great, right? And but yeah, like training is a necessity for me
yeah.
in some regards where it's like it's something to do to stay relatively healthy for her, right?
Oh yeah.
So
It
yeah,
for my wife, it's a means to an end. Like
yeah,
she goes to the gym, but she's not a gym person. And that's actually been a fantastic perspective on me. And I think it's broadened my general view of fitness, I think, in a lot of ways where I have been able to step back and be like, yeah, not everybody approaches this like I do.
yeah.
And in fact, I'm actually kind of like I'm the weirdo. Like I'm the outlier of all the people that I know. And not saying that I've ever thought that was wrong, but I think it is a general awareness that a lot of people in the industry probably should have,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like, hey, you're not saying you're doing anything wrong, but you do need to probably understand that you're not the norm at the
Yeah.
same time, right? Like this is not everybody looks at this the same way. And, so for me right now, it's like I've kind of gone more into the middle where, it's just like, yeah, I'm to a point right now where I really actually enjoy my training, probably for the first time in a while, simply because I'm not chasing a mark, right? I'm not
Yeah.
chasing kind of a
Yeah.
competition status. And that's kind of a fun place to be. And it definitely doesn't mean I'm not going to get the itch, to compete and perform at something, in a few years. But yeah, right now it's just like it's a whole lot of like pump sessions and conditioning work.
Which
And
like is
I have no issue.
generally fun. Right?
Yeah, and
Like,
it's like generally fun. Like I'm
yeah.
actually enjoying the process. Like I'm not chasing, there's no PRs happening anywhere on any of my lifts, but there's a whole lot of just pump work and the conditioning stuff, which I actually coming from a track background, like I enjoy that. I enjoy the pain of just
Yeah. Well, I was gonna ask you, what did
stuff
you
out
run?
of.
What events did you
I
run?
so I ran the 400.
Oh yeah, that's like
Uh
the freaking worst.
yeah,
Maybe the
it's
800, but the
dude,
400.
I always tell
Yeah.
people it's just like, yeah, I was kind of like raised on just like lactate hell, and
Yeah.
for a long time it's like if I didn't feel that when competing, it's kind of like I felt like I missed something.
Yeah.
There was like a sense of guilt almost, like where it's like, oh, I must not have worked hard, so
Yeah.
even getting into more of the distance running and stuff has been hard for me just because I want to feel the pain,
Yeah.
like deep
Yeah.
down I'm
People,
like
I mean,
it's like I kind of need
yeah.
it, and so
Yeah.
even like that's been a little bit of a just a mind fuck for me over, or I'm just like, yeah, like I mean, why can't I run 6 miles at 175 heart rate? Like there's nothing, if
Yeah.
I can do it, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
It's like I got to figure out a little better tapering strategy
I,
on some.
like I have never been a powerful person, so like just the pursuit of power. I did an Olympic lifting meet. I've done a couple Olympic lifting meets. I really enjoy those. A lot of skill acquisition. Olympic lifting is very frustrating though. Like
Yeah.
if you're off, you have a shitty day, it frustrates you, right? But like I never ran track. I played soccer, and I was also told like by my football coaches that I had like the worst first step they'd ever seen in their life. So like, which also at 16 years old didn't really help me.
That's
But
an awesome thing to tell
yeah,
an
I was like,
athlete.
yeah, like it's like you like your top speed is not terrible, but your first step is so bad. And because then I just thought I just didn't have a first step. But getting in so I did do an internship with or not an internship. I did do a mentorship with Angus Bradley, who I do like Angus. I think Angus goes around to start beef because it's a good way to grow your account. And but he's like, dude, lifting's great. We should get everybody lifting. But you know what I think is like a really good, if you saw a silhouette of somebody sprinting, your brain automatically goes to like 18-year-old, right? So like the cool thing in my brain is like if that's an 80-year-old, you're like they're doing something right, right? And
Oh
I'm
yeah.
like, yeah, that's kind of a good model to try to like cuz like deadlift, yeah, that could be anybody, really up until like 80. I'm not like I got a 90-year-old who is deadlifting and that's awesome, right? But she's not lunging easily or like doing anything super fast very easily, and like that's kind of where my brain is going. And it's just I just suck at it. So like just little incremental gains are really powerful. So, but yeah, I think the overarching thing that we both are hopeful. I think we're both orienting around so much is like, hey, like, and it goes back to how we started. Mechanics matter. There's no actual person that's actually cares about helping people with this stuff thinks that mechanics don't matter. But mechanics matter when I'm with you or prescribing exercises based on what I know about you, right? In the grand scheme of this fitness adventure, like we're just talking about theoreticals, and it's like so much of this how you move is such a practice thing. Like that you 100% nail the head out on the head. When somebody sucks at squatting, elevate their heels, give them something to put in front of them, and you're probably going to get them looking like they're a pretty good squatter pretty fast, right? For the most part, right?
Well, and it's just like I was talking to one of the coaches in our group the other day, and I was like, there's nothing that frustrates me more when I'm in, and I've seen this like hundreds of times, if not thousands, or I'm like walking in a gym and I see, a client goblet squatting, and they're just like, they're limited by basically how much load they can hold in their upper body. You can see it. And I mean, they're 10 feet from a leg press. And I'm just like,
Yeah. 100%.
like just stick, like, let them just mash out reps on the leg press, and then work on upper body strength, and find a way that they can squat,
Yep.
easy or whatever. But it's just like, there's just, I think there's just so much emphasis on being able to do a skill at a super low level in the industry right now, where it's just like, yeah, you got that person, squatting a little better by your standards, right?
Yeah.
Depending on how vertical you need it to be. Like, that's what everybody's fighting about right now. Like, how vertical the pelvis is translating. So by your standards, they look better, but if you have to decrease their ability to load a movement 75 to 80% to get them there, like, are we improving fitness or general, like, or anything at any level that matters, and
Yeah.
it's just, for me, it's like, that's where I kind of fell off that train a little bit, where I was just like, yeah, like, everybody looks a little prettier, but their ability to, like, do stuff has decreased so exponentially that it's like we're moving backwards,
Yeah.
in so
Yeah.
many ways. Um, I don't know. I definitely think there's a lot about it, but yeah, you even talking to Greg, because I worked with him for the last 6 months or so, and it's just like, we even joke around, we're like, narrow ISAs don't exist on the internet.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's just doing wide ISA corrective drills. It's like, we just conveniently forget all of these people,
Yeah.
don't exist, because it doesn't fit the arc model.
Yeah.
It's like, the best thing you can do for this person is widen their stance and externally rotate their feet, which, Matt and I were talking about, 3 or 4 years ago, and it's like, oh, but then the whole, ER to IR to ER, like, it doesn't fit anymore, because you changed the stance width, and that only works when you're completely under your hips. And
It's just context dependent, and it goes
yeah,
like both. Why not both? Like, I because I'm 100% with you. Put them on the freaking leg press and let them get their heavy work there, and have
and
them
then
just
do a
train the
skill.
pattern a little bit, and like, hey. But yeah, it's man, it's just like intellectual. Do you follow, or do you like know Nassim Taleb, the anti-fragile guy?
Yeah,
It's the intellectual yet idiot. Like, like, and it's also just not fun to be like, yeah, you can. It's not that you can do whatever you want, but like, you kind of can. Like, yeah,
yeah,
you like, just try it out. Let's see. And that seems to make us feel like so many of the questions that I get from people that work with me kind of boil down to, what do you want to do?
oh
Right.
yeah,
And it seems like that's not me being a coach, but that's really the like, because I'm assuming a lot of your vertical integration type of stuff is maybe, I don't know if that's like Charlie Francis or where you get the vertical, but where
yeah,
that's kind
just
of
the
my
current
first,
modeling. Yeah,
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 right. But like, I was just actually reading some Charlie Francis like a couple days ago, and it's like, just figure out what the person freaking wants,
yeah,
right, as best you can, and see if like you can match up what you're doing to what they want. Because if they know that what you're trying to do matches up with what they want, they're gonna take action, or they're gonna like
yeah.
work hard at it, right? Um, yeah. No, I appreciate this conversation, man. I like, and I don't know if you like Billy G's Finer Diner down there or some other places, but we'll have to get breakfast. Breakfast is my favorite.
Absolutely,
So,
absolutely, man.
where can people find you?
Yeah, I mean, the Instagram's really the only social media that I do much on. So compound performance underscore on Instagram, and then all of our stuff's on the website, www.compoundperformance.com. Those are the easiest ways to find me. Just even DMing me is probably the easiest way to find me if anybody has questions. But yeah, it's keep it simple.
Keep it
Two
simple
platforms.
and try to enjoy this shit. If you're,
Yeah,
yeah, if, and when you feel stuck, get help.
yeah,
Get an outside opinion on it. So
100%.
I appreciate you, man. This will be up in the not too distant future. If everybody listening, check out Kyle, check out Compound Performance. Yeah, I've learned a lot from your content, and I've just integrated a lot of your ideas with my own, and so I appreciate you keep putting the stuff out, and that's
Yeah,
what it's been very useful. So Peace, man. Appreciate you.
Awesome, man. Likewise. Thanks for having me on.
Peace.